Republican field of presidential hopefuls continues to take shape. The #1 issue, the economy, is driving the debate and setting the stage for a larger discussion about the vision for and the future of this country. One man uniquely qualified to help lead that debate is Dennis Hastert. From January of 1999 to January of 2007, he served as the 59th Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, with his tenure making him the longest-serving Republican to hold the post. He's now a senior advisor at the Washington law firm of Dickstein Shapiro, and he joins us from our bureau in D.C. Mr. Speaker, welcome back to Bottom Line. A pleasure to have you on.
Thanks, Mark. Great to be with you.
Sir, today at a conference in Boston, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, said that the economic crisis will have what he called a profound, lasting economic impact. This crisis did not start on President Obama's watch, but he does own it now. Democrats say the crisis could have been worse. Republicans say it is worse. You served under two presidents, Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, a Democrat and a Republican. How were you able to navigate the partisan divide and get things done? And how can and should both parties deal with their differences right now?
Well, one of my biggest challenges was to try to bring two sides together. I always said my title was a speaker. They should have called me the listener. But our job always was to bring a middle mass of people, both from the moderate side and from the conservative side, so we could get good legislation done. I worked with President Clinton, who certainly had a different set of objectives, and was 6 years with President Bush, who also had a different way of doing things, but we were able to work together.
Mr. Speaker, working together, easier said than done. When you have the atmosphere at this point so toxic, how can anything get done?
Well, I think it will eventually, but you know, this is a great American debate that's going on right now. There's two philosophies on how to run government. A philosophy that, you know, big government and higher taxes and government that creates a solid safety net for everybody forever is one agenda, and the other agenda is, listen, less government, more individual responsibility, less taxes. And that's the debate that's going on. So when you have this huge issue that's going on, you're going to have pretty tough politics.
Mr. Speaker, you mentioned big government. My colleague Michael McKee in the last half hour, our economics editor, he showed a chart, and Mike gave us a report that he said that would be a good campaign issue of big government, how government has expanded under Barack Obama. But he says it's not true. The budget deficit has soared for the past 3 years, but Michael did correctly point out most of that is because Congress cut your taxes. So where is the big government divide here?
Well, you know, it was interesting because the first 3 years that I presided over speakership, we paid down over $650 billion of public debt. And even in that time, we had cut taxes. So it's not cutting taxes. You need to keep the economy going. You got to get the stimulus for the economy to roll. And what's happened, you've had government like a big sponge that sucked up money and taken it out of the capital reserves, so it's not getting invested into the jobs. And even the president's job campaign today, you know, we're trying to cut, the federal government's trying to cut, or the Congress is trying to cut $1.5 billion out of the budget. And excuse me, $1.5 trillion, and the president wants to add on another $0.5 trillion. So you know that math doesn't work. Wouldn't work out.
You spoke of spending and the president's plan, the jobs plan. One of the key elements is infrastructure spending, putting Americans back to work to fix the nation's crumbling roads and bridges. Concerns have been raised about more federal spending during this time of out-of-control debt. Is there a way to pay for this without bleeding more red ink?
Well, you know, first of all, most infrastructure, highways and rail, are paid for by transit funds. And, you know, every time somebody goes to the gas tank and puts a gallon of the gas in, you're putting 18 cents into the federal budget to pay for highways. That money needs to be paid out in products, and you have to have a highway bill to make sure that that's done. That's just every day. And the highway bill hasn't been passed for the last 3 years, and it should be. So that's a way to stimulate the economy. But, you know, the fact is we have more fuel-efficient cars. People are driving less. Price of gasoline's high. And so on, because of supply and demand, the highway trust fund is low. So we need to go to other strategies. I think you need to go through private-public partnerships to build the roads and the bridges that you should build.
The president's also calling for $1.5 trillion in tax increases, primarily on the wealthy, to help pay for this jobs plan. Mr. Obama's made clear he's going to veto any legislation that seeks to cut the deficit through spending cuts alone. Is there a middle ground? Will revenue increases have to be a part of any deficit-cutting measure going forward?
Well, you know, there's some couple ways to grow revenue, but the best way to grow revenue is to grow the economy. And the best way to grow the economy is to get capital involved into schematics that you can hire people. You know, there's one situation that I just think is such a ripe apple to be picked. We have over $26 trillion stranded in foreign countries, Europe and Asia. Because of our tax policies, we can't bring that capital back because the taxes are too high. Yeah. We could cut those taxes and make sure that capital, you bring half of that money back, and you'd stimulate this economy. And there's a lot of things that the president can do.
I'm sorry, sir. There is two senators, McCain and Hagan. They're co-sponsoring legislation that would, in fact, call for a repatriation tax holiday. But that was tried in '04, and when that happened in 2004, a lot of that money did not go back towards job creation. It, in fact, went to dividends to shareholders. How do you do this again this time, but ensure that it goes toward job creation, putting Americans back to work?
Well, I think you understand this. When you put dividends back to shareholders, shareholders take that money in reinvestment. They don't buy new houses or new cars.
Critics say that didn't happen the last time.
Well, you know, if you look at 2004, we had a tremendous amount of growth during that period of time. Part of that was because of the tax policy, both on capital gains and on dividends and repatriation.
Sir, President Ronald Reagan, would he have adopted the Republicans' current stance of no new taxes? And I say that because we should note that Bruce Bartlett, who's a columnist for Tax Notes and a senior policy analyst in the Reagan administration, he told Bloomberg News in a phone interview, quoting here, except for the '81 tax cut, he, President Reagan, raised taxes nearly every year he was in office, 11 times in all.
Well, you know, I was in the legislature most of those years, but I was there for the last 2 years of the Reagan administration. And what Ronald Reagan really did is bring down taxes to a level. He also brought down the inheritance tax. That's what he worked at. I mean, that's what his goal was. And, you know, there may be some little taxes around the edges, but basically Reagan's philosophy, and I was part of that, was to put money into the funds where you raised capital and you created jobs.
Right.
That's what he was all about.
Mr. Speaker, if I could ask you quickly before we go to a break and bring you back, but President Reagan, he did raise taxes. How would that square with the Republicans running for president right now?
Look, you know, Ronald Reagan at his day had taxes, and then there were small taxes, like I said, taxes on the fringes. And he made the case, and he got people to pass them. He also had huge tax cuts.
Yes.
And that's why sometimes how he balanced those things off.
Mr. Speaker, thanks for staying with us through the commercial break. You hear those stats. Most people are blaming Washington instead of Wall Street. What's your take?
Well, I think you hear a lot of discord come out of Washington. People would rather see government get along and work things out, and I think that's where their frustration comes. I really don't think you can blame everything that's on the economy on the Congress or on the government. Yeah. Certainly, there were some problems in Wall Street going back with mortgages and how they were spliced up and diced out, and I think that was the beginning of the downfall. Unfortunately, that was during a Republican watch. But yeah. I think that really started in Washington, or in Wall Street.
Sir, are you surprised by the size and scope of these demonstrations?
Well, yeah, I think there's a lot of frustrated people out there, but I see some of these people in these demonstrations, and they're being bussed in. I know in Chicago, these folks were being bussed in from someplace else. And listen to one testimony of a young fellow said, well, you know, he went to college and he has $100,000 in back payments to make. Well, you know, that was his choice to do that. You got to go to work and pay him off.
Sir, Republicans in President Obama's administration, a man who you worked closely with when you were Speaker, he is the Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood. He accused House members of putting their hope for the president to fail ahead of working towards solving the nation's problems. And this is criticism coming from a man who has impeccable Republican bona fides. Do you believe there are some lawmakers who refuse to help President Obama, period?
You know, I really think most of the lawmakers in Washington want to get something done. We have a real problem with our economy. I think they are keen to get at, but the problem is some people have different solutions to fix the economy.
But sir, are there some who don't want to help him at all?
I think there's some who are very set in their ways on what they think is the right thing to do, and they disagree with the president, and they're not going to agree with him. So, I mean, that's a philosophical difference, not a policy difference.
Sir, we have less than a minute left. Last week, you did endorse Mitt Romney in his Republican presidential bid. You also endorsed Governor Romney in 2008. Why Mitt Romney?
Well, you know, I didn't jump on that campaign back again right away. I wanted to see what Mitch Daniels was going to do in Indiana. I liked Haley Barbour in Mississippi, and you know, I work with Newt. Newt brings a lot of ideas to the agenda, but I think Romney's a guy who has been there. He's been governor. He had, in a pretty tough state of Massachusetts, being a Republican governor, he got results, and he also, you know, has been a business guy, and he turned around the 2000 Olympics when it was going downhill real fast, no pun intended. But just his force of personality, I think he's a steady guy. I think that's what the American people need. That's what this country needs to get it back on track.
Sir, if I could ask in about 15 seconds, Herman Cain's 999 plan. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, we worked a lot, and I was a supporter of the flat tax. The problem is Michelle Bachmann kind of hit the nail on the head with a flat tax. The devil's in the details, and it's how you start to tax people and make sure that you don't have any other taxes on top of it. So we can never really quite work out what those numbers are. Nobody really knows what the numbers are. It's all speculation.
The former Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, Dennis Hastert, and now a senior advisor at the Washington law firm Dickstein Shapiro, joining us. Mr. Speaker, it's always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Mark. Nice to be with you.
You too, sir.